Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm George McCarthy, better known as Mac. I'm the president of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and it's our pleasure to bring you to another of our continuing series of Lincoln lectures. These are all kind of organized by my colleague Anthony Flint, who's hopefully got some food in his mouth, so he won't be able to say anything at this point. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce Maggie McCullough. Maggie works with a group called the Reinvestment Fund in Philadelphia on a social venture called PolicyMap, which is an attempt to find ways to make policy decisions more or better driven by data, right? And this whole idea that policy would be driven by information is on one level self-evident, and on another level quite elusive. When I first got to know Maggie at the Reinvestment Fund before PolicyMap was created, they were doing things using older technology that was both quite daunting and quite impressive. As a project that they were doing for several funders, including the Ford Foundation where I worked there, they had decided to actually produce a map of all of the funds that were coming from the workforce system at the federal and state level and where they were going in Pennsylvania. That was just for Pennsylvania, wasn't it? Or was it?
It was just for Pennsylvania, yeah.
And when they did it, they actually they did it on paper on a wall, and it was gigantic. It was unbelievably complicated, both the sources and uses of workforce development funding. So they'd done that so successfully, several of us asked them to do the same thing for housing, which also proved to be incredibly complicated, all the different sources and uses of public funding that was going into housing support. But that was probably 10 or 12 years ago now, and since then we've had great advances in technology, inventive ways of displaying data on maps. And so it was, what year did you?
2008 we launched it.
So in 2008, the Reinvestment Fund decided to launch PolicyMap as a way to really help local practitioners, researchers, policymakers to actually look at, gather information, and then find ways to creatively display it in mapping software as a way to help both inform policies, but also to track the impact of policies over time, and they've been doing it very successfully ever since then. So Maggie's going to tell you a little bit about that, but the idea here is, of course, something that's near and dear to the heart of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. It's always better to be making decisions based on information than it is based on intuition, right? And one of the things that we're really hoping is to continue to support any effort we can to bring data right to kind of the decision-making point in policies and practice on the ground, because ultimately we think that both policy and practice will improve as a result of more information. So without further ado, let me introduce Maggie, and she can talk a lot about what they've been doing, and hopefully we'll have an engaged question and answer after that.
Great.
Thanks, Maggie.
Sure, thank you. Mac mentioned the story about that huge map that we did of where workforce investments were coming from the federal, state, and actually local levels, and then in what programs they ended up in Pennsylvania. And it was about maybe 15 years ago that I did that, and it's one of those things that stands out as like a point in my career. I was really happy with that work product, and it was all part of an all-night activity because I had little kids at the time, and so I would work at night. So I took the rolled up paper that they would draw on, we had a big roll of it, rolled it out on the floor, and was like, how can I help people visualize the complexity of all these programs and the funds, and they have all of restrictions attached to them, and then so that birthed what became the big map on the wall. So we ended up doing it for a few more states as well that were interested in it, and the housing. So, but I want to talk about PolicyMap, which is the other thing that I'm really proud of. As Max said, we launched it in 2008 from the organization called the Reinvestment Fund. So I want to start by just talking to you a little bit about the Reinvestment Fund, why we built PolicyMap, who uses it, and then dive deeper and show you how the city of Philadelphia is really incorporating this kind of data into its land banking program, its choice neighborhood program, its consolidated planning efforts. And it's really, we have many governments using PolicyMap, but what Philadelphia is doing is probably the most robust and integrated use of the application to date. So I wanted to show that to you. So the Reinvestment Fund is a community development financial institution. I think many of you are familiar with that. It's a CDFI. It's been around for 30 years. It's based in Philadelphia, and it has 4 divisions. The core one, the big one, is its lending arm. It has been lending in the Mid-Atlantic region for 30 years, mostly in affordable housing, and then over time it has started to get big into grocery stores in urban markets where banks would not go to put in a Pathmark. We've started to do daycare centers, other kinds of facility lending, some small business lending. We also have a real estate development arm, which actually, mostly in Baltimore, assembles parcels of land, builds houses, and then sells them to low-income and moderate families. Policy Solutions, which is where I worked at the Reinvestment Fund, started to look at both where we were making investments over time, and we got heavy into the use of mapping, paper maps, as well as what kind of impact are we having in places where we say have done a lot of rental investments? How have we changed the markets in which we are working? And it was a lot of that work in Policy Solutions that really birthed the creation of PolicyMap. So I have some stories that I always share about what prompted the birth of PolicyMap. One of them is we had a large contract with the state of Pennsylvania where we went out and we collected all kinds of data. They wanted housing price data, they wanted land use data, they wanted zoning data, they wanted foreclosure data, they wanted income data. They wanted to see all of that data in combination with where they had made investments. They wanted to know how the demographics of the population were changing. And so it was a few $100,000 project. We built this tool for them. We got into Ira Goldstein, he runs Policy Solutions, overheated car, and we drive from Philadelphia to the capital of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg. And we, like today, we do a demonstration of all the data that we have. And the technology at that time, this is like 2006, 2005, everybody's using ArcView desktop software. And at the end of it, I handed this person a disk that had all the data on it. And when we got back into Ira's overheated car, I said, no one is going to put that disk in their computer. Because they not only had to put the disk in the computer, it had to be on a computer that had this expensive software. And then they had to have training in order to be able to do something with the maps. And they weren't shareable. And that was sort of the first thought in that car where I thought, you know, we should just do this, put it online, and there's some efficiency. Instead of just collecting it for Pennsylvania, there's some data, it's available nationally. Just collect it and clean it for the nation and load it into something that is more accessible than just on that stupid disk. Similarly, when we were working with the city of Philadelphia, we were gathered in the mayor's conference room, and there are 3 housing agencies in the city of Philadelphia, in addition to the Public Housing Authority. We had L&I, we had the police department, and they had all sent us their data on spreadsheets, where they'd made investments over time, what the crime rates looked like. And we put those spreadsheets again onto the disk that could be read by the mapping software. And we had this meeting and we showed them maps and we went to different neighborhoods and they were like, why are we all doing this in Strawberry Mansion? Why are we all on top of each other? And why are there other parts of the city where no one's doing anything? There was a lack of coordination, and this was 2006. It still exists today, even with the advance in technology. And that's where we've been working very hard to help that communication happen. So those are some of the things that sort of birthed the idea of PolicyMap. I was able to go to the Reinvestment Fund board and they gave us the seed money to get started. We've had help from other foundations over time as we built this. And now we have a business model that allows for the sales of site licenses to universities like Harvard. So any student or professor that's there can go in and get in. We have over almost 60 universities at this point that have bought licenses to PolicyMap, and that's helping us to become a self-sustaining nonprofit effort, which is really exciting. So what we learned, both from our experiences at the Reinvestment Fund and other experiences that others had had, is basically that government at all levels, federal, state, and local, they are looking for data for three very specific reasons. The first is they want to understand the markets in which they work, right? And these can be called market studies or needs assessments. They have to do them for HUD. They have to do them when they're doing a grant application to a federal agency. They need to be able to communicate what a neighborhood looks like and how it's changing in order to seek funding or think about what's going on in a place. They need to think about investments going forward, and this is particularly in light of really scarce resources. No city has enough money to do everything that it wants to do. So in terms of place-based activities, to sort of think strategically about where can I spend my limited resources, having access, easy, simple access to data becomes crucial. And the third, and this is probably the area where they're not moving as quickly as the first two, is to start to evaluate the impact, understand change over time in places where they have made investments. And that can be difficult, right? There's a lot of other factors that can come into play into how a neighborhood does that have nothing to do. It could be despite the city's actions in that area, the place has improved. We've done some work for HUD as it thinks about its neighborhood stabilization program. They're really interested to know in places where we spent money, where we invested, did those markets improve? And so we did sort of a quick and dirty analysis to look at those markets compared to markets that were very similar at the beginning of the NSP program, but were never touched by NSP. And to say, did this place trend better over time than these other similar markets that we didn't touch? And we've been doing that quarterly for HUD. We'll be doing it for another year of these quarterly analysis, and that's been interesting. But I would say for the most part, this impact evaluation has not taken off in the same way that the other two have. The problem, however, right, is that collecting data is complex, right? You can't just download the data from the census and then have it and do something. You have to be able to clean it, to normalize it, to put it in its software application where you can start to, in terms of mapping anyway, visualize the data. So it's both the data collection and the software makes it an obstacle to really being able to incorporate data in your work. And so our approach here was that we set out to try and create the largest library online of what we thought was reliable, authoritative, normalized, place-based data. And by place-based, I just mean geographic data. You have to be able to map it. And make it available through a familiar interface. It needed to be something that didn't require extensive training, and we've worked a lot on our user interface. We still have a way to go because there's a lot of complexity in there, but we wanted to make it, and I say this all the time and people laugh, it's like, people shop all the time on the internet. They make a few clicks and they're able to make a specific purchase. This should be that simple, right? And that is something that is part of our mission and something that we continually try and improve upon. And then our business goal as a nonprofit, if you can have a business goal, is that we want to do as much as we can for the public for free. And then we also want to have a self-sustaining business model. So much of what we offer in PolicyMap is available to the public for free. And then we have other things that sort of sit behind the paywall, and those things are how we've started to become self-supporting. Just a little more detail on the problem. Mapping data is difficult for non-GIS users. GIS is the Geographic Information Specialist, who has historically been the map maker for many cities, many organizations. Unless you have that skill set, mapping data can be difficult. You need to find the software, then you have to find the data, you have to know how to put the data on the map. And if you're a local government, that data is coming from multiple sources, and not every agency in a city has the same infrastructure set up. There's some, like your tax department, likely has a really good infrastructure set up for data collection, but your housing office, your L&I, they may not. Some of it is still sitting in Excel spreadsheets. The mapping tools can be expensive, and at the end of the day, the data is not that simple, right? So as I said, in a city government, you're going to have different agencies with different data capacities. Many cities, like Philadelphia, now have open data portals, which are amazing. But you still have to have some level of technical skills to pull down the data from the open data portal. You have to know what to do with a shapefile, or a access file, or a CSV, or some of it's in PDF. So it's still there, and I always say we're a great consumer of those sites because we scour them and try and pull in, but it's really not accessible yet. It's available, but not accessible. And all of these things sit in all different places. So you've got a lot of census data, you've got data that comes out of the FBI, you've got data that comes out of the IRS, you have data that comes out of the CDC, you have data that comes out of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. All of this is amazing place-based data, but it sits in all these disparate sources. You can't actually get a quick picture of a place when it's all sitting in those places. So basically our approach was we used this triangle just as a visualization, that at the top of the triangle you have your GIS experts and software, right? These are specialized capabilities, specialized analytics, high-end training, and at the bottom you have consumers like me, who are used to using a Google map for driving directions, or I'm used to using it to find a restaurant. So it's an interface that I'm comfortable with, but it doesn't have the kind of data-rich and sophisticated capacities of the GIS platforms at the top. So that's really the middle piece. We wanted to create that middle piece for consumers, something that was in between for consumers, but more for business and policy users. When I worked in policy solutions at TRF, we were doing a study for the city of Baltimore. And I had conducted the research, I had done the analysis, and I just needed 10 maps made for this report. And I had to get into a queue, and I was constantly like, Al, can you please make me a map of population in Baltimore? Can you please make the map? I need it by Friday. And it was just, he says, I can't, I have these other people that need things too. I wanted to be able to go somewhere and make a map of population of Baltimore on my own. It shouldn't have been that difficult. And that's one of the things we've tried to achieve here. So at the end of the day, PolicyMap now has more than 37,000 data indicators. They're coming from hundreds of public and private sources, as well as some proprietary data that we purchase, home sale stats, vacancy data, information on nonprofit locations. We purchase some of that data and make it available through PolicyMap. We try our best to make sure that the data is authoritative, cleaned, and normalized. This is not Joe Smith's crime data from New Jersey, which you can find on a Google map on the web, because I have no idea who Joe Smith is. I have no idea if that data is accurate, and I don't want one of our users using that data to make a database decision. This is all coming out of respected sources. We've released it in an online tool with an interface that we've tried to make sophisticated yet user-friendly, all at the end to help people understand a place and make informed database decisions. And then we offer access through a variety of modes, because we learned that some people didn't care about the application. They just wanted access to all of that data for their own work. And so we will ship that data to them through an API or in hard files. And it really saves them a lot of time because they don't have to collect it from all those different sources. So at this point, when we think about who's using PolicyMap, there's 38,000 users. They represent about 12,000 organizations. As I mentioned before, part of our mission is to make much of we do free. So 79% are using the free side. Over 60% are governments and nonprofits, all using it at different levels. A number of federal agencies, state housing finance agencies, local governments, community development organizations, and the foundations that fund them. Real estate, universities, banks, consultants. The key to all of this, though, is that these are not GIS users. These are not people in IT departments. These are people like me. They're doing policy analysis. They're a program director, public relations officer, a compliance manager at a bank. These are program or business line staff. That's who is using PolicyMap, and that's really who it was designed for. I show this only to say that it's a really niche market. We understand that. Not everybody and their mother is really at all interested in this. My mother still doesn't entirely understand what I do. but we've had 8 million maps made since 2011 when we started to track some of this data. There is growing usage of this kind of information. So I'm going to switch over to online demonstration of how Philadelphia is using the tool so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. In general, what it does is it is providing them with an instant geographic data infrastructure, right? So those 37,000 indicators that we've aggregated, they're like, once they have access, they're available to them through PolicyMap. And then to that, they can load their own local data, or in some cases we load it for them, and they can leverage that existing huge database with their own local data that's of importance to them. And then they're using it to support key planning efforts. The land bank is new in Philadelphia. It's having some fits and starts of the mechanics of getting itself working, but they're using it to think about how they prioritize all of the city-owned property. And I'm going to show you a map, so when I say all of the city-owned property, you can see the volume that we're talking about, how they go about disposing of that property, or perhaps selling some of the property in the open market. Grant writing, public reporting. It is fostering interdepartmental coordination. 9 agencies in Philadelphia all use this single site, so police, L&I, the 3 housing agencies, not the housing authority because they tend to not want to play all the time. Let's see, streets, revenue, they're all loading data, but then they can see each other's information, which is really crucial.
When somebody wants to match their data with yours, do they do it by address, or do they have to have some kind of a coordinate, or do you do it by some kind of unit of analysis, census tract? Or?
We'll load however the data is made available. So if there's address level data, our users like Philadelphia can load that CSV file themselves of address level data. It will geocode it for them on the fly and show it on the map. Some data comes in at block group, census tract, zip code, county, state. We load that data for them at this point. Our data loader does not have the capacity to load thematic data independently. So they have done a combination. Crime rate, for example, is something that they show at a block group and a census tract. But their specific, like, multifamily investments show up as addresses on the map. So this is the Philly instance of PolicyMap. It is exactly like PolicyMap. So it's still, you're going to get a feel for everything that's in there. You'll see the URL is actually phila.policymap.com. So we create a unique URL, and it's accessible by IP address. So only if they're sitting in one of the city agencies can they get to this. The public can't get to this. They have not yet figured out what data they want to make public and what data they want to keep private. They're not even sure of the cleanliness of all the data that they've loaded at this point. They've loaded data, taken a look at it, and go, ooh, that's wrong, and then they pull it down, and then they load a different one. So it is, I mean, it's been a great process as it helps them to figure out what they're collecting that's right and what's wrong. The application makes maps, creates tables, runs reports. You can make 3-layer maps, which is basically looking at the intersection of 3 points of data on the map, as well as the data loader, where they can upload their own address level files. The data that we have in PolicyMap is all stored under these tabs. So here we have demographics. And it's coming from the census. We update with the ACS. And we load it, like I said, to the lowest geography that is available. There are some data sets, like those coming out of the CDC, about obesity or diabetes rates. They're only at a county or a state level. So we load it, and it makes a great national map, and you can see, you know, how parts of the country differ from other parts of the country. But when you're zoomed in on Philadelphia, it's all going to be one color because it's shading for the whole county or for the whole state. So there are those, you know, intricacies to the data. But if, say, we wanted to look in Philadelphia at where people under the age of 18 live, the idea is that all you have to do is click on here. We can take the map to a census tract, a block group, a congressional district, we could type in an address. In the case of Philadelphia, we loaded their neighborhoods for them. So we could go to, I'm going to just go to Francisville, which is a neighborhood that sits a little north of Center City. So I'm going to assume you can hear me, but this is Center City, Philadelphia. This is up here is North Philadelphia, where you have some of the more troubled neighborhoods. And this stuff is right in between those two very different kinds of places. So when we look at this map of where people under the age of 18 live, the legend, if you can see it, is telling us that the darkest purple places are places where more than 26% of the people that live there are under the age of 18. So you can see that you have a little pocket of higher concentrations of young people here. This part of North Philadelphia, this is a distressed area here, has a lot of kids under the age of 18. And you can click on the map to see its actual value. And the bubble comes up and it says, this area here that you clicked on is a block group, and that's its block group number. And 32.44% of the people live there are under the age of 18. And then it compares it to the geographies in which it sits. So compared to the census tract in which it sits, compared to the city, in the city, 22.67% of the people are under the age of 18. So you can tell that this is a place that has a higher concentration of young people than the city does as a whole. So in thinking about program development or things that you might want to do with young kids, this is an area that might be ripe for your strategic planning efforts. All of the data works like this. We could pan all the way up to Boston if we wanted to. It is loading for the whole country. The breakpoints on the map, on the legend, are being set for the nation, but you have the ability to edit those ranges. So you could edit the ranges if you wanted to, and you could also change the color. You don't have to go with our default purple map. All of the data works this way, right? So we could, instead of looking at kids under the age of 18, we could look at, this is a new indicator that we just loaded, persistent poverty tracks. This is actually a yes or no indicator, so it's two colors on the map. The areas that are purple on the map are considered persistent poverty tracks. The areas that are yellow are not. Each map has a little simple sentence at the top telling you what you're looking at, but there is a sprite here that will pull down and give you more information about where this indicator came from, what it's showing, and then a link back to the actual source. Shading on the map indicates if a tract has 20% or more of the population living in poverty over the past 30 years. So, like the name implies, this is persistent poverty. These are census tracts that have been in this state of poverty for more than 30 years. In terms of strategic planning for the city, they can see that they have pockets sitting in areas which have been doing better that have still stayed in that persistent poverty state. There's housing data, so there's home sale data and lending data. This is falling off of the menu because of the transition from my laptop to the screen, but normally that on your computer would be up there in the menu. Lending data, this is Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, so where people are getting mortgages, what percentage are government insured, how many are prime loans, quality of life data, a lot about jobs, the kinds of jobs that people have in a place. The education, how many people have a bachelor's degree, high school degree, as well as information on where schools are located and how they're performing on their tests. Health, this is one of our growing groups of indicators. We've loaded from the ACS where we have uninsured populations, and it's broken down a few ways, but we could look at the total percentage of people living in those census tracts that are uninsured. And so we can see here again, you have these dark purple areas where you've got more than 27% of the people living there do not have health insurance. So you can start to now say, okay, this is all really interesting. I'm learning more about the markets in the city of Philadelphia and where they might have specific problems. But we could, for example, put, and this is one of those menus that's falling off the bottom, community health care centers, right? So federally qualified community health care centers should be available, I would think, in areas where you have a lot of people that don't have insurance because they need to be brought in for, right, some of their health care needs. You have a lot of them, there's nothing. You have these huge areas, there's nothing. So as you think about whether you're trying to work with a CDFI to do some financing around a healthcare center, this becomes great data to bring to the table to really help describe the place in which you're trying to work. And so the need for a federally qualified healthcare center, or maybe expanding one of these here. You can click on these, by the way. Whatever data we're able to get in the public domain goes into these info bubbles. So this tells you the name of the healthcare center. It tells you if it's federally funded, and if it has a certified health clinic. Many of the multifamily sites that we put on here will give you the number of units that are in the building and what percentage are low income, that kind of information. There are a lot of people that love to visualize data on maps, but there's an equal number of people that want to see it in tables or want to see it in a written report. One of the things that our folks do is they can create a custom region on the map by either drawing it or assembling a bunch of tracks and then pull out pieces of information for that place. So let's say, this is an area that I want to learn more about because I really do want to consider, if I'm Philadelphia, pushing for a federally qualified healthcare center. So I'm not drawing it perfectly here, but obviously you can. So this might be an area that I want to learn more about. So I draw the custom area. I can name it Federally Qualified Healthcare Center Target Area. Save it. Everything that you do can be saved for later. And then for that place, I can get a report. And we have a number of canned reports in here. The easiest, the broadest one is the community profile report. And so what it's doing is it's on the fly starting to aggregate different pieces of information about the place. So it tells us the political representatives, the population. So that area that I drew on the map is an area where population is actually growing. It gives us the racial composition of this place. So 35.69% of the people who live here are white, 26.61% are African American, and a full 54.6% are Hispanic. So there's overlap there. When you report to the census, you can pick more than one. You've got a very mixed, very diverse population here. Many of the people do not have health care, and there's no federally qualified health care center there. This starts to enable you to make a compelling case for something that you're trying to make happen. The ages of the people that live there, the incomes, all of these, it's a long report. Tables can be collapsed so you don't have to see everything if you're not interested. And then the last one, which I always find really interesting, is of the people who live in that place that we drew on the map, what kind of jobs do they have? So it's not ranking, but 18.4% are in accommodation and food service, 13.1% are in healthcare, 11.7% are actually in manufacturing, another 12% are in retail. So there are a lot of folks here who are working without insurance as well. So all of that can be saved and redistributed. So all of this that I've just shown you is available to not just Philly, but to everybody. But now Philly has all of that available in its instance of PolicyMap. And I'm going to take this data off. And now they're able to have their own data in the application as well. And that sits here under Philly data. So one of the data sets that we've loaded for them is zoning. It's actually something that we're going to be working on with the Lincoln Institute going forward, the collection of zoning data from around the country and making it available in a single location. But here is the city's zoning data, the red areas, purple, yellow, and we can go back to the neighborhood where we were if we wanted to zoom in a bit. And so all of these are parcels in the city of Philadelphia, and the legend helps you to identify what type of zoning it is. And they have a lot of zoning categories in Philadelphia. I don't want to say this point too often, but I can't tell you how important it is. This zoning map does exist on the web, right, in another place, but it sits there by itself, just for the city of Philadelphia. They don't have there's no capacity for them to pull that zoning layer in and actually use it in combination with other data that they have to start using it as they make decisions going forward. It just, everything sort of sits within its own silo. Similarly, they've loaded crime data. They have loaded what is called the Philadelphia MVA. This is an analysis that was done by the Reinvestment Fund as part of an initiative that we did with the mayor's office some time ago, NTI. And we've done them for cities around the country, but it is a cluster analysis, and it is looking at maybe 10, 11 different variables, and they will vary a little bit by city, to look at the market and give it some category to help a person understand what's going on in that place. So in this MVA for Philadelphia, these purple places, they call them regional choice. These are places where if you could live anywhere in the Philadelphia region, you'd still pick one of these places, right? This is an area that is doing well. It has a nice mix of residential and commercial activity. The job situation is good. The housing prices are good. There's not a lot of vacancy. If you had the money and you could live anywhere, you might choose one of these places. The blues are steady markets. These are places that are not in decline, and they're also not growing, but they're steady. They're in good shape. Yellow is transitional, and the two colored yellows are transitioning up versus transitioning down. And the orange are really distressed markets. So for the city of Philadelphia, and they've now had this updated 3 or 4 times, it gives them a way to think about, in an era of really limited government resources, where you can't give every neighborhood the same money for the same things. A, it doesn't make sense, and B, there's not enough money to behave that way. It helps them think about what they need to do in a distressed area to help bring that up to like a yellow. They also want to work in a steady market, a blue, to keep them steady, or maybe even get them into a purple area. And the kinds of investments that you might make in those places will be different, right? So this is something that they've used as one of their guides. So the neighborhood that we were looking at, Francisville, is blue, so it's a steady market, and it's got steady markets and some purple around it. And then this part here where it starts to get very distressed borders its north. So this is one of the layers that they're looking at as they think about the land bank. So another data set that they have loaded are the city real estate listings. And if we put these on, they appear as orange circles on the map. So every one of these orange circles, and I'll zoom out so you can see the volume. Every one of these orange circles represents a property that is owned by one of, I think, 4 or 5 city agencies. And they want, through the land bank process, to begin disposing of them and getting them back into use. But as you can see, they're really concentrated in those orange distressed markets. So you can already visualize what this property looks like. It's going to be abandoned, long-term vacant. It's going to need a lot of work. Going to have a very low market value. They're sitting in markets where there's not a lot of market activity in the first place. But they need to also recognize that they have some, that are sitting in steady blue markets. And so these may be areas where they can take those properties and just sell them at market rate because that market's already steady. They have some in yellow areas. The treatment of how they dispose of these properties should be different based on the markets in which they sit. And so many of the city officials, they know that, right? They know that. It's not like some novel idea. But having the data at hand is the thing that has been novel for them. They haven't had that kind of information. And so again, with these with the ability to create these custom regions, they can actually look at this area and say, you know what, these properties I want to just list for, save it, and then in addition they can run a report like the report that I showed you previously, or they can actually get a list of all the properties that fall in that area that we drew on the map. And then they can download it and then take it to the next meeting and say, these properties fall into market that looks like X, and I think we should sell these at market rate. Now, there's all kinds of politics in Philadelphia too, and city council people, and I'm sure that they don't always run by data-driven decisions. There will be other forces at work that will impact how this all goes down. But that is one way that they're beginning to incorporate this kind of data in their work. They also have a choice neighborhood in Philadelphia, and they have loaded, I'm going to put that on, they have loaded those boundaries. Choice neighborhoods are a program from HUD, and they show up as these green boundaries on the map. They actually had 3 areas. This one by Temple, this green area right here, is the one that was funded by HUD. So you can see that they are, there's Temple University. It's a really distressed market. They have a lot of properties that are owned by the city here. Again, because it's a choice neighborhood, they may want to have a different plan for how they dispose of those properties. And they can click on any one of these to learn more about the property, its address, this is a vacant lot, the square footage, and the price, what they think the market value of that lot is. They have also loaded crime data from the police department. So we could see where all violent crime is taking place. Here's that, and I'll turn off these properties now. There's that green boundary again. So we have a lot of violent crime in the northern part of the choice neighborhood. Around Temple is a little bit better. They have their own police force, so I'm assuming that comes into play. But this kind of data they're showing to HUD. We're keeping it updated for them so they can begin to see how some places are changing over time. And they used it a lot in their strategic plan to present to HUD. It made life much easier for them. So the last thing that I wanted to show you was, in addition to being able to toggle off and on the different layers, put points on top, perhaps see a relationship like where we might need federally qualified healthcare centers, you can do what's called 3-layer maps. And this is where, for strategic planning purposes, you can think about where a place meets certain criteria. So if we wanted to, using some of the data that we showed before, look for areas that have a lot of kids under the age of 18. So we'll say more than 30%. So now we're applying filters to the data. And what we now see, the purple on the map, are places where more than 30% of the people who live there are under the age of 18. So we say, okay, here's our pockets of places where we have a lot of young people. Now we want to also see those places that have young people and they're in a persistent poverty tract. And we want persistent poverty tract. So now as it refreshes, these are areas that meet both criteria. More than 30% of the people are over the age of 18 and they live in one of these tracts that's been in poverty for the last 30 years. And just to make it even more depressing, that they lack health insurance. Health uninsured total will say that more than 20% of the people lack health insurance. So now these areas meet those 3 criteria. So you do have these pockets of kids that are at risk based on those 3 criteria. And you could say, I want to see where there are resources for them in these places. So I want to put on public schools, or I want to put on libraries, and to see where the city has resources in these places for these kids that maybe they could either, if they can't give money to all libraries, maybe they want to focus on the libraries in these communities, right? There's all different ways to use this kind of information as they make public policy decisions or investment decisions. And look, these are libraries. Here's a library, here's a library, here's a library. very difficult for a child living in one of these areas to get to one of these libraries unless they can get someone to take them, or if they can get a bus, that sort of thing. Here's some pockets. There is no public library over here. And as we know, public libraries are in great need of funding at this time, so it's likely that there's not going to be a new library put there, but they need to understand that this is a place that needs some set of services. So that was my broad overview. A lot of cities are loading foreclosure data. That is one of the issues that they're trying to track. A lot are loading different target areas where they're trying to concentrate investment, and then those investments, because they want to see how much work everybody's doing in those places. And they have not gone as far as Philadelphia at this point. I think San Antonio is thinking, wants to go there as well. Houston, there are a few other cities that sort of recognize the need to have this kind of stuff handy, right? It's not, and because it's built already, it's pretty easy. It's accessible to just turn it on for somebody else. So with that, I think,
Great.
yeah,
Thanks, Maggie.
sure.
So I'm hoping that you could give us a little bit more insight into NTI, because what was interesting about the original Neighborhood Transformation Initiative in Philadelphia was that the mayor said, look, we don't have enough subsidy to go around. We need to find a way to triage our neighborhoods and really focus our efforts on the transitional neighborhoods to keep them from slipping into becoming bad neighborhoods, and then really limit the amount of money we put into the really distressed neighborhoods, because basically we're not getting anything out of it. And then the presumption was also that any money that went into any of the different neighborhoods would have attached to it an expectation, so that if you're going to do that, then if you're going to put money into a really distressed neighborhood, you should expect to get a lot more than if you're going to put it into a transitional neighborhood.
Right.
But could you talk a little bit about the reaction that you got from both some of your political folks and also from the public when that whole plan went into action?
So yes. So Philadelphia has a really strong set of city council people who have geographic areas that are their responsibility. So the idea that one council district was going to get more money for housing demolition than their council district made them crazy. And so there was a lot of negotiation at the end of the day about, everybody wanted the same amount of money for their council district. And that was really counter to what we were trying to get at. I think some of the strategies were like, for the distressed areas that, you really don't want to do a new housing development with HUD money, right? You can do some new or renovated housing for low and moderate income people. You really don't want to do it here, right? It's like in a sea of distressed area, because it's just going to be like a little island of newly rehabbed homes that's sitting in blocks and blocks of vacant, right? So if you have to use the HUD money in a distressed area, what the city wanted to do is to say, okay, let's not do it here, but let's do it here, right? Let's do it on these places that border a strong market. Maybe have an anchor institution like a university, maybe are near a river that have some other amenity, so that if you're having the same impact, right, you're putting in 50 new affordable housing units, but you're doing it in a place where it might actually bring that neighborhood up because it's already bordered by strong neighborhoods. And it could, over time, if you kept having some, spreading of that, instead of trying to go from inside out. But the city council person that represented this area wanted nothing to do with that concept, could not. That meant that the people that lived in his community were going to have less opportunity to have an affordable housing unit in his district, and he was really opposed to that. So it was, so some things worked. They did a lot of demolition of, what do you call it, when a property is in imminent danger, and they targeted those differently. They did some things, but it was a little bit more around the edges than what I think the ultimate goal was. Yeah.
If I wanted to know, for instance, about vacant land, how you define it vacant land to actually map it, where do you have the documentation that is accessible also? Or prices? How do these prices, what kind of, or what concept, or what kind of indicator are you using and where they came from? Can I
Right.
get the information about all that?
Yes, so with each, the vacancy data, we do get it from, the Postal Service used to publish vacancy data every quarter and it was free and they stopped doing
They
it.
define, that's the question, because depending on the use, I may not agree with the
That's
kind of
right.
definition that is being used, right?
So when you click on any of the layers and look at the detailed information in the box, it will tell you how they defined vacancy, and it will send you back to our data directory, which actually has lots of information about every indicator on here. And if there's coverage issues, it's not available for the whole nation, it's just a subset of counties, that's listed there too.
If a city or municipality outside of the United States were interested in this, could they use the software, or it's basically something that you do and it's not like a software?
It is a software, but right now we don't have the capacity to map outside of the United States. And a lot of that has to do with our team doesn't understand the geographies at which things need to get mapped in another country, and we don't understand the data. So it's not that we couldn't do it, but I don't have the team in place to do it, because a lot of the value that we add is not just the underlying maps, but it's the cleaning of the data and making sure it's displaying properly on the map, that kind of thing. But it's not something that we can do right now. Yes.
I run a real estate technology platform, so we do a lot of things that you do in terms, but on a very narrow set of the data. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is data quality, because we're a brokerage and we're liable for errors and omissions.
Yeah.
So I'm using, for instance, new market tax credit data, and I'm showing where tax credits are being allocated for projects to work are being allocated, but it's definitely not accurate. And so I have to cross-reference that data with actual on-the-ground intelligence. Do you all, I mean, what's your perspective on the value add of QA on data, and how are you going to approach that? Is it in your plan, in your business plan, to upgrade to that kind of effort?
It depends. So for that market value analysis for Philadelphia that I showed you, that was all validated by driving around many, many times. The data that we get at a national level, so if we get data from the CDFI fund, which we load in, we will clean and normalize it, and then in validating it, we will compare it to other data sets that we think should be similar, or it'll bring out any outliers that make us realize something's wrong with this data set, and then we'll go back to the source and say, like, we think there's a problem with this. And sometimes they've actually changed things that we've brought to their attention. So I have a data team of 6 people, and that's all they do is the collecting and cleaning and validating of the data. The QA is like, that's the worst job in the world. It's like
How do you see the capacity of the governments in maintaining data? Is it improving?
no. It's all like 3 or 4 years old. And it has some of the most interesting indicators, and they're at a national level, and there's not that many other sources for them, right? Some of them are out there that are really expensive. So we try, because we give away a lot for free, we try and turn to the public domain as much as we can. And then when we can't find something that we think is good, then we'll buy it on the private market. Yeah.
And another data question. You mentioned using the ACS data, and as you know, that comes in 5-year average or 3 and 1. And one of the concerns for small area are the variance in the data. These are samples.
Right.
How do you approach that issue?
So we do the 5-year estimates, and we have not done anything to the data except to display it as it is from the ACS. Many of our users know, like, they won't use the ACS data for that reason, and then there's another group that want it. So we have, because they want it so badly, we did put it up, and we do note in the data directory that it's a small sample size. The higher geographies are likely more reliable than when you zoom in. The other option is to license data from a company like Nielsen or used to be Claritas, but that's also extremely expensive. And I think there were problems in their data as well, right? Because they were taking data from the last census and then doing something in a black box and spitting out what they thought was correct. So yeah, but it is something we talk about all the time. And there are some indicators we don't put up from ACS because we think that when we do that looks wrong, you know.
Just for everybody's information, ACS is the American Community Survey that was a supplement to the decennial census that actually replaces a lot of the decennial census information, but is collected more frequently than the census.
Right.
Do you include the transportation data such as journey to work or the bus and transit networks and frequency of service?
So we do. We have journey to work, how long it takes somebody to get to work, how many cars they have in their house, the number of indicators related to that. And then we've licensed transit data from a company called Urban Mapping, which now no longer exists. But we took the transit stops and we have a calculation which is how far to a line is this particular place. So that data is getting kind of old at this point. I don't usually show it, although some people still use it. And it doesn't have bus lines, it's just rail. And we are this year hopefully going to be using, is it called GFS? We're going to be getting new data that from the Department of Transportation and rerunning that analytic.
You said that the map breaks down the numbers by national data. Do you have any way of, in a selected area, indicating the highest and lowest values so it's easier to recalculate that?
Not right now, but that is something that's in our roadmap to do so that so maybe it would give you ranges based on the extent of the map, or it would give you ranges based on the metro area. You know, you could select the state. But right now, because we didn't build that capacity in, we said, okay, at least let people change the breakpoints on their own so they can customize it for a particular area. But it does require having more knowledge about the place to get those breakpoints right. Yeah.
In terms of selecting additional data to add, or making sure that the information you're providing is what's needed, do you have any kind of advisory groups, or mostly are you working with clients so that's giving you a feedback loop?
We have both. So we get a lot of feedback from users who say, I would really like more health data. So when we launched in 2008, there wasn't even a health tab. I would say health and energy, aging infrastructure. These are some of the things people would really like to see available. So we have a pipeline of new data that we want to process each quarter, and it comes from clients. And then I have an advisory board that meets quarterly. They'll have ideas of their own. We get some wacky ideas too that get thrown into the mix sometimes. But the other thing that we want to focus on this year, and I think this is important, is so since we launched, we were like, grab more data, push it into the platform. And now we have so much, and some of it, when a person puts it on the map, they don't know what they're looking at, right? So we need to spend time with some of the key data sets and make them into analytics that are easier for people to digest. So an index, more ratios, something that is like that we have longitudinal employer household data, LEHD data, and it's about where people live and where people work. And it's fascinating data, but when I put it on the map, I don't even know how to explain what I'm looking at. And we need it to be like an index, that this is a place that is like workforce ready, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how is this place? Or this is a place that is ripe for small businesses to start up on a scale of 1 to 10, something that just makes it easier for people to digest. So we have a few of those that we're going to be working on this year. I think the open data is great. I mean, we try and get as much from the open data space as we can and pull it into PolicyMap. The difference is that open data is great for somebody that has some technical skills or data skills that knows what data to pull down and can do something with it. And the folks that are using PolicyMap are generally it's not the same group of people using both. The other thing that was interesting is Philadelphia has a pretty big open data portal. I would say only 10% of the data that they put into PolicyMap is in the open data portal. The rest is sitting, it's been in PDF, it's been in Excel spreadsheet, so they wanted to map where they had done vacant land treatment for the last 10 years. That took somebody time to pull that data set together, and it's not on their open data portal, and I don't know that it ever will be there because they're not 100% sure that it's accurate. So I think what we're doing complements that effort really well. It's a different, because much of it is a different level of data, a different type of data than what people are putting in their platforms.
When you have conversations with government, which I think is so impressive about the work that you're doing, that they're involved in that iteration of innovation and also the normalization, are there any subsets of data that they're just challenged by and don't want you to show beyond sort of from the challenge standpoint of it exists and too difficult to perform from legacy systems, or they just don't want that out there in the conversation?
Most of it has been that they don't want it out there. Some of it they've pushed up and taken down because they didn't want other agencies to see the data. They don't want city council. City council has access to it. They didn't want city council to see the data because I forget that there was a bill in front of city council. I think it was related to the land bank, and they didn't actually want city council to have the data in front of them, so they pulled it down from PolicyMap, and then we got to put it back up. Tax delinquencies. Now there's one that was up and it's never come back. They saw that and they panicked and they took it down. There's tax delinquencies all over Philadelphia, but and that was something like never would they be able to put it on the open data portal because it's too sensitive of information, but it could live in their instance of PolicyMap because that's limited to those 9 agencies, and still they didn't want to share it with each other. So, yeah.
Would you ever be able to map like the incidence of tax delinquency at a higher
level?
geography?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've talked about doing.
So produce a heat map of
right, right.
Are there any examples, Maggie, of anybody using a PolicyMap metric for impact data and sort of requiring, whether it's grantees or users of their services, to demonstrate impact based on PolicyMap?
So the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation has for a number of years given access to PolicyMap to their planning and implementation grantees. And they load data about where they're doing things in their target areas. And then we actually, like the report that I showed you, we built a report for Wells Fargo that looks at a grantee's target area and then compares it to 2 or 3 other areas which are similar, and they can track how educational attainment rates are changing in their target area versus other places that they're not working in. It's in many ways what we did for HUD with NSP. We've tried to replicate that for some. And for Philadelphia, they want to have a report like that for Choice Neighborhood too, to see all this money is going to go into Choice Neighborhood, and we're not putting that level of resources into other neighborhoods. How is their change over time different? So a few are doing it that way. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about how it's been used in a process, like between agencies, or to the extent that there are examples of it used with communities that are doing a strategic planning process, for example, and have you had to provide technical assistance, or are the staff just doing that piece?
What about Detroit Future City and the market value analysis that you guys did for that, right?
Right, and we haven't loaded that on this yet. So it depends. So like the community groups that work with Wells Fargo Regional Foundation, we give them a lot of upfront guidance on the data that's in there, and then they're able to go into their communities and show it to others or print out the reports and distribute them at a meeting. So that definitely happens, and we just help in the beginning. So long as you have somebody that's like in the organization that's like kind of digs it, then it's fine. In Philadelphia, they have done a lot of group meetings where they pull the maps up together, staff do, and they start toggling on and off, trying to better understand a place. and then decide then, oh, we should be loading this data, we should be loading this data, we should be loading that data.
Just wondering if the policy map can also be used or misused in the sense of creating like redlining districts where you won't invest. I know in the mid-60s in Boston, I'm sure it was elsewhere, Dorchester was redlined by private market, by private banks. And the question is whether, you know, government agencies or whatever are potentially doing illegal, unconstitutional decisions, all under the guise of, quote, strategic planning and
Right.
use of limited resources.
Definitely. I mean, people could definitely do that. I haven't been aware of anything yet, but it could be, because you could make data to tell any story that you want to have it tell. Sometimes our maps appear on blogs that we want nothing to do with, but we haven't had, and we have a lot of banks that use PolicyMap, although it's usually the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, lending officers that are using it. So I haven't heard of anything to date, but definitely it's something we know is possible, for sure.
So maybe this isn't the goal of the software, but do you have any plans to add in some sort of place-based prediction software suite? So for example, for something like ArcGIS, you could look at incidents of homicides, and then look at like police coverage of the area, and then community like health centers, and see something like 15% of homicides are explained by police coverage, etc. Do you have goals to do something like that, or not really with this tool?
So we do have it on the roadmap. It will not be happening this year, that's for sure. But it is something that people have asked for regularly. This year we are going to make it much easier to download data right out of PolicyMap. So the data that you see on the map, you could just download by clicking a download button. We have 37,000 indicators in here. You have to use those menus to find it. There's nowhere to type in like poverty and just have the poverty related indicators or home sales. So a data search feature, it's actually one of the easiest things that we can do because there's so much metadata with each of these indicators. It'll be a nice search feature, but we're designing that and putting that in. The quality of the prints are not so hot, which is a challenge just with online stuff in general. Like when you go to print out something, it has to turn to a PDF in most websites before it will print. We have to do the same thing. So those are some of but the data search one is the one I'm most excited about because it'll just make that data even more accessible.
So Maggie, if a city were trying to plan for resilience, would you be able to give them enough information to know about what would happen with different levels of, say, sea level rise? Do you have enough like specificity on like altitude or level of properties, any of the geological data that could? So
we have geological data, not on what I've showed you now, but we do have it and could load that in. We don't have enough requests for it at this point to put it in, but we have a couple of customers that have wanted it, so we do have it.
Any plan to identify areas by radii or driving time?
That we don't know. That I don't have on the pipeline. We could, but it's not something that we're working on.
Do you charge people to upload the data, or does it depend on what kind of user it is? Or?
So yes, if they have a lot of data that they want to send us to load in, we'll give them a custom price to load it in, and then how often they want to keep it updated. So if it's quarterly, monthly, the price will vary. For some, we've created feeds from a database, right into PolicyMap, and so we just charge them for the creation of the feed and then a small maintenance fee so that if it breaks, we fix it. So it really depends on the volume of data that they want to load in. And then the addresses are a little easier because the geocoding is not as hard.
Do you cover the whole United States now?
Yes.
So any municipality in the United States can come and say, we want this data on your...
Yes.
So the Massachusetts legislature has just established a commission to look at the potential of using land value capture as a mechanism to fund public infrastructure. And so to what extent do you think it's possible with something, a tool like PolicyMap, to say, to track the impact on property values of a specific investment, let's say a bus line or a new subway line or something, and to look, at multiple, oops, I think your display went off, but that's okay. To look at multiple points in time and say, this is what happened as a result of that investment. Do you have that ability at this point?
We do. So we could have that, if we knew the date that the line went in, and then we would look at, say, quarterly home sale prices from that date forward, we would be able to trend that. And then it's really more of a question of how it gets pulled out of PolicyMap, whether it's in a report like that. So you could see, here were 10 infrastructure investments, and for each 10, here's how the home prices changed. The reports are really easy to build because it's just pulling different indicators for different time periods out of the database. So once you were to decide what you wanted to measure, it would be pretty easy to implement. And if the data was updated with frequency, that you could look at change on a regular basis, right?
But do you already have those data?
We do. We have quarterly home sales going back to at least 2000. We've tried to take everything back to 2000 at a minimum. We do not go back to the 1990 census, but we start with the 2000.
Yes. Do you have any plan to look at how different groups use the data? So, for example, banks or corporations or governments, because I could imagine that you could accelerate the success to the successful archetype in the hands of certain groups. Right. Correct? So my interest would be whether or not strategically for your organization, whether you're looking at how certain groups use this data in their best interest. I mean, I think your intention, of course, is one that we would love to see take place, but this can be used in many, many different ways.
Yes. So we do interviews of folks that we consider our heavy users, and I can track usage in our database, so I know who's in there every day doing something, and many people are really happy to be interviewed. So it's something we only got the tracking capacity about a year ago, so it is a newer activity for us. Yeah.
What about institutional data or regulations, or different counties, different places in the U.S. have different laws behind what you can use or what you cannot do? Can you actually access that when you examine the data?
So we don't have that in there now, but it is a data set that if we could, we could. It's something we could load in, but we have not loaded it in now. I'm not sure how it would visually display on a map, because it would really be for states, different regulations. I mean,
they use pilots, the other place they don't.
Right. Yeah, it could be something we could explore, but not all data works on a map. I mean, the other line I always say is, just because you can map it doesn't mean you should map it, because something's just better in a table or in a report.
And can you do directly statistical analysis? For instance, if I, following on Mac's question about the impact of something on value, you would have to do some kind of regression controlling for some of the data. Can you do that?
So right now, the platform, we have not done that in the past, right?
You can download the data and run it in SAS or something, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why that download button is so important, because our higher end users, that's what they want to do, right? And we need to make it easier for them to just download it from the platform and then put it into SAS or whatever else they want to do. But again, the core of our users would not be able to do a regression analysis, right? They are folks that are public policy people, or like I had local, state, and federal government jobs. I would have loved a tool like this, because I was always waiting for somebody to print me a map. So, yeah, it's something to think about. Yes.
When you're building reports and you showed a tool where you can draw your own area, how does the tool handle data sets that don't necessarily match up with that area that you've drawn?
So what it does right now, and we may change this going forward, is it just, if the area that you've drawn, so it always wants to aggregate the smallest geography possible. So it wants to go to block group, and it will aggregate all the block groups that are contained in that geography, as well as any where at least 50% were in the geography. We have not weighted those areas that get cut off in any way. We have footnotes at the bottom of the report so people understand how we're doing that calculation. We have some customer, NeighborWorks uses PolicyMap for a lot of their mapping. They didn't like that calculation, so we changed it for them to their own unique specifications, which we can do. But as a general rule, what I just described is how the reports work. Yes.
Are you following what's happening with Flux.io out of Google and how they're standardizing and normalizing zoning data?
No, but I'd like to know more about that.
Maybe we'll talk about it.
Okay, cool.
I was just curious because you mentioned that normalizing the zoning data. So.
Yeah, great.
You mentioned that for the sort of standard data sets that are in PolicyMap, that the break values are set for smaller city purposes. If we're uploading data that is similar or the same as for example, tree canopy cover, if we're also uploading our own data, are we able to set our own values, break values for that?
Yes. Yeah. So like the Philly crime data, that's breaks that they told us that they wanted to use.
All right, well, join me in thanking Maggie.